My grandparents describing how they would be walking past the toilet. They wouldn't be allowed to use it because that toilet was for white people. So they'd have to hold their pee in because they couldn't use the toilet because their racial group didn't allow them to. I think we are so complacent and naive as Muslims in the UK and the US who just assume that the rights that we enjoy today, the masjids that we have, the halal facilities, the freedoms that we enjoy will just remain. We just take it for granted. America always propagate and manufacture consent for their wars by telling their population, oh, the people of Yemen are chanting death to America. Oh, the people of Iran are chanting death to America. Surely the inevitable next question is why? It starts with looking at how messed up South Africa is today will help you understand apartheid and a desire for that never to happen again. We saw foreign nationals, Somalis, Ethiopians, literally be collected in these township communities, put tires around them, and set on fire. I was in Los Angeles, 2 weeks ago. I go to this gala dinner. Not a single person was talking about Iran. Everywhere I've been around the world for the last 2 months, there is no other topic. Nothing. At every social gathering, the only thing people are talking about, Iran, 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 Iran. This is something that I've not spoken about publicly, but I ended up in a police station.
Welcome to the Caravan Podcast, and today we're joined with none other than Yusuf Omar, the co-founder of Scene TV. You have quite the lengthy resume. I mean, when I was Googling you and trying to find you, there's no corner of the internet where your name did not shed some sort of light, whether it be TED Talks, whether it be hitchhiking from South Africa all the way into Syria.
Wow, you've done your work.
Yeah, I have quite a bit, and in the same amount, it doesn't do it justice, and it's such a privilege to be able to sit down with you and talk to you. And honestly, it shows how humble you are to give your time to us, because you have an incredible amount of achievements. I'm really excited to learn from you, and inshallah our audience does as well. With that, I like to kind of just jump into it with the sake of time and everything else that's happening in the world. You are truly making an impact. Now, with it, one of the biggest dialogues that we talk about when it comes to media in every sphere, particularly in the Muslim sphere, is representation and telling these stories. What was kind of the catalyst for you when you started your journalist career that led you in this direction? Because this is when you were 21 years old. I don't know how old you're now, because I don't want to age you. but
I'm 37 today.
Alhamdulillah, I'll give you many, many years. But that was almost I can't do math. You're my math guy. 16 years ago, right? Which is well before this dialogue was even happening, and you were at the forefront of it. What kind of catalyzed that journey for you to go towards journalism when everyone else in our community is going towards the arts, the sciences?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I think at the core it's privilege. You almost have one generation of ethnic people who were the first generation migrants. They rocked up in the US or the UK, and they just had to do what they had to do to survive. So both my parents were born in apartheid South Africa. My dad's family moved to the UK in the 1950s. So 1950s, grandfather goes from a great life in South Africa to now arriving in the West, no opportunities, works in a cloth factory, right? Just sewing and doing awful work. And my grandmother was basically at that stage almost like a domestic worker, looking after a big house. So they took huge sacrifice. There was a generation of Pakistanis, Indians that arrived, it's almost like the frontier, and they just did what they had to do to survive. Second generation, which is my father and his brothers, they basically tended to generally try to be professionals because they often saw that their own fathers were working class, blue collar jobs. So my father becomes a dentist, so does his brother, they become doctors. And they generally go for careers that offer as much wealth as possible. How do we make sure that we have more income than the previous generation? How do we send our kids to the best school? How do we give our kids a better life than we had? So that's the second generation. And then you get a third generation, alhamdulillah, my generation, which, to be honest, are a form of, we talk about white privilege, brown privilege. they've grown up with a large safety net, a minimum level of affluence. And in my case, I was able to take the luxury of going for a career pathway that may not necessarily work out, because I had the luxury that I could always go back home. I had parents that I could go and stay at their house. If your parents rely on you for income, if your siblings rely on you for income, you don't have that privilege. So I can't take too much credit for the creative industries that I ended up in, for working in the media space, other than privilege. And I think that is the same reason why when you look at our, Zionist brother cousins on the other side, and so many other diaspora, they had 2 or 3 generations of privilege, which then allowed them to get into these other spaces.
I mean, one thing I really want to tap into here is because your family history being in apartheid South Africa, I mean, the mirroring, if, I don't want to compare, but the mirroring of what's happening in, in Gaza and Israel as well, right? And so when it comes to this and this recognition, I mean, I think Nelson Mandela so famously said, none of us are free until those in Palestine are free, because they're experiencing similar, if not more, of the tragedies. Was it easier for you to kind of identify that as, a Muslim that's outside of, whether it be more dominantly Muslim countries, like many of us here who grew up in Western liberal Muslim spaces? We can understand and hear these news, but sometimes for us, we haven't necessarily experienced it, particularly, for example, like from a historical perspective of our Black Americans here, of the history of slavery that exists here, right? And so even though that was almost 3 or 4 generations ago of the Civil Rights Act, was it easier, did you find, within the people of South Africa, outside of the Muslim identity, to see the tragedies that were happening abroad in occupied Palestine?
It starts with looking at how messed up South Africa is today will help you understand apartheid and a desire for that never to happen again. So as the son of South Africans, I used to go there on holiday on a regular basis. And then I ended up moving there in 2010. And I thought I was going to go for a year. I fell in love with the country and stayed for 5 years. But the main outcome I had was, why is this country so messed up? It's a country that has the highest Gini coefficient on earth. Gini coefficient is how you measure the difference between the wealthiest people and the poorest people. The difference between them is off the charts. It's higher than India. It's higher than any part of the African continent. It is literally off the charts how wealthy the wealthy are and how poor the poor are. It's also an insane landscape when you realize that like 80% of the country are Black South Africans, yet in 2026, they own less than 20% of the land. 80% of the population are owning less than 20% of the land. The native population are squatting in their own country. And when you go back through the history of the country, you realize 1913, they had this like Native Land Act where if you were Black in South Africa, you were removed of your land. If you were Black and you were South African, you were not allowed to own land. And all that land was given to white people. 1994 happens. Nelson Mandela wins democracy. Woohoo. All people have equal political representation, but they didn't get economic representation. That land was never given back. So you jump forward to today and you go around South Africa and it's this beautiful country, fascinating country, but you're like, wow, white people still run this place. The Black population are economically enslaved. So when you see that lived experience, you can't help but ask yourself, what factors, what sick social science experiment went wrong here that led to this calamity that we witness? On top of that, obviously listening to stories from my parents. My mom describing how she went to a school exclusively for Indians. Your race group was defined by your school. Going to park benches and not being able to sit on them because it said whites only. This is in not just my mother's lifetime, this is on our lifetimes. This was still 1994. This is not that long ago. My grandparents describing how they would be walking past the toilet and they wouldn't be allowed to use it because that toilet was for white people. So they'd have to like hold their pee in because they couldn't use the toilet because their racial group didn't allow them to. My father describing how he used to windsurf. He was on the beach, he was an adventurous guy, he was windsurfing, but the wind, the God-given wind blew him onto a beach that was only for white people because you had white beaches, brown beaches, Black beaches. So it's this combination of like witnessing the dire position that South Africa is in today and understanding that that is a legacy of this sick apartheid system, listening also to my parents' stories of this weird social science experiment that they grew up with that gives you an acute appreciation and understanding for apartheid. And then thinking, surely the idea of supremacy based on race is over in the world today. It ended with slavery, ended with apartheid South Africa. And then to learn, no, it's not. And then visiting Palestine and seeing it firsthand and seeing different people being treated differently because of their ethnicity. What an absurd idea. That will radicalize anybody who experiences it to dedicate the rest of their lives to trying to end it.
One thing I really want to ask more, this kind of feels like a personal advice type of section almost. You know, when my brother went to Gaza almost 2 months before October 7th, and he went obviously as like a Western Muslim doing a medical mission trip. And what he was amazed by is the level of their calmness and the way they approached everything. And for my brother as a Western, he saw all the injustices that were happening, right? And he felt angrier than they did, right? And what I'm going to ask you is almost like even hearing your experience now or hearing what your mother went through, right? For me, my initial reaction is anger. And I think anger is oftentimes a privilege to feel. And in this situation, you don't seem angry. And I'm really curious of like, how do you process that? Because I think obviously we're clear that there is an injustice happening, but there's obviously a strategic way to use that anger or lean into that anger. Is that something that you've grew to process and understand and redirect that energy in a productive way? Or is it something that you feel and you just express it differently?
I think we all need to appreciate that these liberation struggles are a marathon and not a sprint. And if you channel your genuine frustration and anger in the tempo of a sprint, you'll burn out before these liberation struggles are materialized. Look at the South African liberation struggle. It took decades, unfortunately. And even right until the late 80s and early 90s, nobody thought the apartheid regime was going to fall. My parents said that the white South Africans were so strong, so well supported by the British and the Americans, it was implausible to think that they would ever end. And it took massive internal struggle, sometimes armed struggle, but also external pressure. People around the world boycotting South African products and services, not wanting to play sport with them, not wanting to even handle their fruit and vegetables. That created the environment or the circumstances that eventually brought about change. So I think I temper my emotions and my anger and my frustration and my impatience with the realization that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And we need to, it's almost like if 10 is complete rage and 1 is complete apathy and not doing anything about it, maybe I'll get canceled for saying this, but I feel like we need to be consistently like a 6. Because you can't sustain a 9. And we need to sustain. Because the problem is, October 7th, by many explanations, is a consequence of most of us having dropped the ball on Palestine, where we just kind of forgot. Or if we didn't forget, we just accepted. We're like, yeah, it's an apartheid system, life goes on. And we can't allow that to happen again. So we need to continue to apply pressure. So stay at a 6, but do it for years and years and years.
Yeah, one thing that really comes to mind as we're kind of talking about this is even the struggle that Vietnam went through. And one of the things that I think it was Ho Chi Minh that said is that essentially for every 10 of us, we're willing to give away for 1 of you. And essentially the idea is that we will endure until we get liberation. And I think even in terms of the 6 and the scale of 10, right, it's looking at us as collective selves, right? There's folks who are going to be at 10, time for your rest, let the next wave go in, right? And then recharge and refuel. So I want to take
as part of that, also acknowledging the wins.
Yeah. Could you explain?
It is easy to be dire and feel like the Palestinian cause has never been more bleak. But if you zoom out, if you're watching this from the perspective of an alien looking down at Earth, Palestine's never been more free. Right? Young Americans are pro-Palestine for the first time in history as a majority, according to the Pew and Gallup surveys. Like, the cat is truly out the bag. So I think you've also got to acknowledge the wins that continue to give you stamina to keep going.
Yeah, and I think one thing that resonates with me is like what Yahya Sinwar saying is that this initiative will essentially expose all collaborators, and it will release everything and pretty much expose everything. And it really has shown what everything is. And I think one of the most important things for the American people, and oftentimes people in America feel like, oh, they hate us, right? When in reality, they've always said, we don't hate you, we just hate your government. And I think the American people are slowly understanding this, whether it be the Epstein list or all these other things, is that collectively as people, whether it be anywhere part of the world, we are kind of on the same team. And I think people are waking up in that consciousness.
But also asking the question, why? America always propagate and manufacture consent for their wars by telling their population, oh, the people of Yemen are chanting death to America. Oh, the people of Iran are chanting death to America. Surely the inevitable next question is why? Like, nobody wakes up in the morning and chants death to some people 7,000 kilometers away, like, unless they have some reason to have that resentment. And I think if Americans start to ask themselves where their tax dollars are spent, the carnage that they've created around the world to be able to support this extravagant lifestyle that they have at home, they might be able to, if not rationalize or justify, at least have some context as to why there may be some folks around the world that want to burn an American flag.
I think oftentimes the phrase that comes to my mind as of lately with the American people is not so much the lack of acknowledgement of these like tragedies that we're obviously complicit for, but it's more so the phrase that goes to keep the people fed and keep them entertained, which is like a Roman phrase that keep them fed and give them a carnival, right? And that's kind of unfortunately where the consciousness lies. It's particularly for what I would say a society that is unfortunately, whether they like to admit it or not, very, very godless, or not have a sense of moral scope or certainty. Even within like the Muslim Ummah, I think there's a sense of drive for us, alhamdulillah, because of our deen. But even then, within the Ummah, we see within the Western Ummah, there sometimes is lacking in that spirit.
Can I say the most shocking thing I've seen through this entire Iran war? I was in Los Angeles, 2 weeks ago?
They call it Little Tehran, I think, as well.
Dude, I go to this like gala dinner, right? And it's full of mostly influencers and kind of B-grade celebrities. Not a single person was talking about Iran.
Yeah.
Wait, really?
Was this a Muslim space?
No, non-Muslim space. Just influencers, people, creators, understood. Celebrities. And everywhere I've been around the world for the last 2 months, there is no other topic. Nothing. At every social gathering, the only thing people are talking about, Iran. Literally, I was at this whole evening in Los Angeles and not a single person mentioned it. And I just couldn't get my head around this. I'm like, your country is the one at war. Your country started this war. Your country are bombing thousands of people. Your soldiers are coming home in body bags and nobody gives a shit. At best, oh, have you noticed the fuel price has gone up a little bit? The gas price has gone up a little bit. I couldn't believe how detached Americans are from their own reality. I couldn't believe the fact that you guys are comfortable paying for aircraft carriers, but not your own public schooling or healthcare systems. It's an absolute, it felt like you're in the Truman Show, that you're in this little bubble.
Well, I mean, I think Americans are the first victim of its propaganda, right?
Yeah.
It's such a deep, deep hole to get dug out of. And I mean, the real numbers of the amount of American soldiers who are coming back in body bags is drastically far from reality of what's being reported or said or talked about. Because the biggest propaganda is that the United States Army is undefeatable. Right, that
this is the story being told.
Nothing can go against it. Right,
it's a great story.
Yeah, it is, and I mean that's why you have the Marvel and all these Top Gun. I mean, if you look into their marketing budgets,
we believe that story.
Yeah, well, the marketing budget comes directly from the DoD or the DOW now, right? And so it all builds into this narrative that hey, if we portray that we're invincible, then we truly are, right? I mean, subhanAllah, everything kind of goes back. If you just take the derivative time, whether it be David and Goliath, all this idea, right? And I think this is why it's so critical that if you stand on principle, if you stand on truth, then you will end up winning, because in that is in the pursuit, you're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so I think when you do bring that propaganda and this masquerade that this is an undefeatable target, you will just capitulate and you will just give up. But historically, that we see with any liberation movements, whether it be the Vietnamese, whether it be the Filipinos, or even Bangladesh, all whenever they go against a great entity, as long as they stick to it, they eventually get their victory.
Let me tell you what I found really confusing, though, is the Muslim American experience. The last time I was in Dallas, I went to a Palestine protest. And at this protest, I saw something I've never seen before. A dude was walking around with a box of American flags, small ones, these little ones. And he's handing them out, and people then are picking them up and they're waving them. So in one hand, they're waving the Palestinian flag. In the other hand, they're waving the American flag. And I saw in that moment two completely polarizing opinions emerge. One opinion said, what the hell? How can you possibly hold the red, white, and blue stars and stripes when that flag to many Palestinians represents the genocide and their murder? The other opinion were Americans saying, no, we're taking back our flag. We're American too. And we believe that the American government doesn't represent us. But fascinating dichotomy the Muslim American experience is, where you are both these things. You're a Muslim and you're an American, and that American identity is so strong that it kind of even shapes those kinds of moments.
Yeah, I mean...
So I have a lot to say on this in terms of the American identity is very interesting, because a lot of the ethos around what we believe, it's anti-government, especially in Texas. You're in Texas, we're all about our guns and glory and things along those lines. But in terms of what you are trying to add as contribution value as a Muslim American, you are constantly facing this issue of seeing that these two things are different, but they're not in reality. And if you actually look at some of the, if you actually look at the reality of where a lot of the social movements have occurred, it's actually been from the Muslim college kids arena. And so they're kind of in a unique position where they're not infatuated by all of the responsibilities of being very old, as well as have the moral and grounding and standing of being able to lean on the Islamic ideology. And so you have the freedom to be able to express those things, where you also don't have the liabilities of what you do on your day-to-day. And so this is why you actually started to see a lot of mass movements start occurring with the college kids, it's specifically with the Muslim college kids in America. And so I would say that a large piece of why there was even a shift and change in the global narrative was because of these kids that were doing encampments in the United States. So I think it's you said at the very beginning, there is privilege with your ability, with your income, your status, your family's positioning. I think there's massive privilege to be considered an American. We get to voice, we get to say things, we get position and power. And so for us, to just say, hey, I'm not American, I think that's a completely wrong approach. I am more American than probably a lot of other folks, to be honest, because I believe in the freedom of speech. I believe that we should be good actors and stewards of society. And so to me, I think, in fact, you should take that sort of that energy and repurpose it to what we can wield in actually making real change. So that's kind of my perspective.
So does that mean you're in the camp of it holding that American flag at that Palestine protest?
I personally think that there's nothing wrong with holding the flag. Your government doesn't represent you 100% of the time. Right. And also they are for sure doing things that we don't agree with. So at the end of the day, it's on. In fact, we are in a position of privilege to be the voice to we have. I think the problem with the Muslim experience is that a lot of the Muslims here feel that they don't have power, feel that they don't have a voice. And I feel me and Naveed are the ones that are oh my God, you have way more power than you think. Let's organize, let's formalize, because that's where the change is going to come. I think that the move towards real change is actually going to come from Western Muslims. Not to discredit any other type of Muslim. It's just that's where the change needs to be resolved. So that's kind of my perspective on
I know when we spoke on this last year, and my opinions actually shifted a little bit in the past year. And I do think I think there's an illusion, and I think there is a very hard thing to accept and swallow, which is that there is the idea of what I thought America was. And the whole world had this idea what American values and ideals are. And I think in our core as Americans, we do believe that. But at the end of the day, we are complicit to what our government does. And even historically speaking, when Americans were being taxed, 2% on tea, that was enough to cause an uproar. Now, about 35% of your paycheck is gone at the snap of a finger, and you don't get really much out of that benefit or lack of. I think the model that functions more in my head, right, as to like what we can see progress happening really lies on what Black Americans have done in this country, historically speaking. Movements like the Black Panther Party or the movements that Malcolm X had started. I think that reality is where change can actually exist, because that's where the government actually makes changes, is when there is another threat that comes to it. I think electoral politics is good in the terms of organizing and discussing, but in terms of actual action and things being done, seldom does it lead to the change that we need. And I do understand the idea of like a sprint and a marathon, but I think sometimes that can disguise the drive you need to have to make things happen a little bit faster, because if we take it too slow with voting and everything like that, there's not going to be a Gaza, right? Yeah. And I think if you look at it, I mean, I could make you president, well, I can't, but if I made you president tomorrow of the United States of America, right? And you're a person who supports the cause, right? But could you end it? There's so many systems in between you and getting things done that exist within the American democracy that would prevent it from happening, right? So you're looking at local government, state government, representatives. There's so many layers that you have to go through that does not cause change the way you need it to happen for a dire situation like this.
Trump would disagree.
But even recently, like as of today, right, we were one vote away from stopping this war, right? But a Democrat, which is generally the leading party, even though it was under the Democrats that this whole thing started, right, voted for the continuation of this war, right? And so I think this is when you have so many interests like Citizens United and all these other things, it makes a very confusing situation. But I do want to take a step back, because this is about you and not about the current situation of what we think about politics. So you started your journey in journalism. You're talking about this kind of inspired from a perspective of privilege. Now, when it comes to your early career, right, in South Africa, as you're kind of making this transition, I know you did some studying abroad, things like that, but what was like the news journey for you? I know like you have a history at CNN, but was that your main target to go into in your 20s?
Yeah, I think my story is one that, like, if you don't get presented with the dream job that you want on a silver platter, that you can often do it yourself without waiting for permissions. I actually graduated with a marketing degree, and I was in the US, and I went to Times Square, looked up at the big billboards, thought I was going to get a job in New York City. And in that moment, I saw this guy wearing like tighty-whitey jockey underpants.
Sorry, that was me.
I knew it.
We'll AI that in. I was kidding.
I knew I recognized that also. And I realized in that second, I don't want to be that guy. Like, I don't want to sell people shit that they don't really need, which is effectively what the marketing industry is. I ended up applying for a bunch of opportunities. I ended up doing journalism, moving to South Africa, doing a journalism course, falling in love with it. I was like, what? There's a job where you get paid to travel the world and talk to people for a living. That's a thing. I then wanted to be a foreign correspondent. I wanted to tell stories of wars and natural disasters, and every newsroom I spoke to said, you're too young, you don't have enough experience. So I was like 20, 21. So I basically gave the industry a middle finger, and I realized, hey, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, these are professions. Professions require somebody else's permission in the form of certification. If I want to be a foreign correspondent, I've just got to get into war zones. Yeah. That's it. And then I de facto foreign correspondent. So in 2010 with...
God bless your mother, man.
Honestly, I feel sorry for my parents.
First 100 is absolutely cracked.
Right? Why is it not working? 2010, backpack full of old t-shirts, head full of young dreams. I decided I'm going to hitchhike from South Africa to Syria, from Durban to Damascus. Why? Because there'd been this perception of Africa as this big, dark, scary continent, largely because of American movies like Blood Diamond that show you child soldiers and drugs and, famine.
Thanks, Leonardo.
Right? Terrible South African accent. So I do this trip, hitchhiking across the continent, and I just fall in love with the idea of being this like one-man band storyteller that I can shoot on a phone and edit and write stories. And at the time, the entire industry was really shrinking. They were running out of budgets. They were pulling back their foreign correspondents. They were closing down international offices. So this young guy that can do a lot with a little is actually quite a useful asset. Another interesting trait is if you continue to knock on as many doors as possible, eventually somebody's going to open. You're going to, you talk about luck, and obviously Allah is the ultimate in providing you luck. But I think that there's an equation. I'm sure you've seen this graph. There's a graph that exists on the internet. On one axis, on the y-axis, it's got F around. And on the x-axis, it's got find out. Have you ever seen that graph? So the more you F around, the more you're likely to find out. And that has been pretty much the story of my life. Effing around a lot and finding out a lot. So going on this Durban to Damascus trip, hitchhiking up the entire African continent, 12,000 kilometers, just catching rides, I end up in Egypt during the first Arab Spring.
Just coincidentally.
Complete coincidence. Allah put me in the right place at the wrong time.
And you don't know Arabic, right?
I don't speak Arabic. I got absolutely no experience. But again, that's like F around and find out. Like, people were like, oh, you were really lucky. You got your really big break. And I was really lucky. But the luck is largely, well, kind of lucky. I've also been hitchhiking for the last 3 months. Like, you know what I mean? If you put yourself in enough uncomfortable situations, you're going to have really interesting life stories. I think the other part of that is if you are getting into a very saturated industry, like media, like content creation, you have to have something on your resume of like, I did this crazy thing. So I tried to every single year of my life from that point on for the last 15, 16 years, have a thing that I did every year. So in 2010, it was hitchhiking from South Africa to Syria. In 2011, I bought a beach buggy and I drove across 3 countries because there was an annual seal cull where they were killing seals with baseball bats for their fur coats. And I drove this shitty VW 1970s beach buggy around and was sleeping in the desert. In 2012, I managed to catch a ride with an NGO into Congo when an ammunitions depot exploded in the middle of a civil population. Imagine they keep all the weapons in a big warehouse in case there's a civil uprising. This warehouse catches on fire. It's like the biggest fireworks display you've ever seen. Massive. Like, imagine tanks, artillery, grenades, all this stuff catching on fire. 2012. 2014, I wanted to be a war correspondent. I went with another NGO and I went to Syria, this time smuggled in a metal drum, probably about the size of this table, across a river into Syria, and I witnessed the Syrian Civil War. So the point is, like, you can wait for somebody else to give you your golden job or your golden opportunity, but many, many, many times in your life, you can say, hey, actually, I can do this myself. I don't need anyone to give me this job. I'll just do it, and then people will recognize me as that career that I want to have.
I mean, you're going into, I know we're like breezing over it, right? I mean, you're talking about an explosion. You're talking about going into an active civil war. You're going into a revolution. I mean, these are very dangerous places to go, especially while not knowing the language on top of that.
I think young men's brains are not so developed for risk.
I'm sure there's a research paper on that.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Like, they just don't know how to process risk?
Yeah, they just don't. I there's a bunch of science behind it, but in a personal experience, I just didn't process risk in a very sensible manner. Like, I think consistently I don't know, I think that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is I genuinely used to believe that, like, Allah loves me. That, like, you keep making it, you keep surviving, you'll keep surviving. And then sometimes in your life, you come very, very close to death. And that's happened to me a few times. And then you're like, whoa, actually, I've got no control over this thing and I've got to pull it back. But like, yeah, I don't think I had a perception of risk as a young age.
Was faith always very like something you held dearly to throughout like your young 20s, or like how did your faith kind of grow in these periods, right? Because like I know as a early 30-year-old now, when I'm in danger, I definitely lean on like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and like everything's on you. Like, if it's my time, right? But I have a hard time going back to when I was younger, right? And thinking about that period because I wasn't always, the most religious or most practicing. But I'm kind of curious, like, because you were in active territories of danger. For me, it was like skateboarding on the highway.
Yeah, I had a terrible experience with my faith in that the more I became a war correspondent and the closer I got to conflict, which happened to be in the parts of the world that impacted Muslims mostly, right? Especially when I was in Syria in 2014, I think I was the furthest away from Islam and was completely disenfranchised by it. And it was largely because I witnessed the overt suffering of the people that I saw praying the most. And maybe that sounds very obvious and literal, but I was like, I just didn't understand it. I didn't understand how the Syrian brothers and sisters that I was witnessing were doing the most for their religion. And the other guys, the Americans, who were not God-fearing, were exploring the furthest corners of the universe and space travel and were perceived to be the more sophisticated. So I think those instances, at least in my life, really challenged my faith, and it took me a long time to kind of come back to it.
Can you expand more like how you undid that? Because I think that's something a lot of us feel, regardless of age, still depending on where they are in their faith journey. So
Gaza.
Yeah.
Gaza, it's only very recently. Gaza was a massive global reset for many different capacities of the world, economically, geopolitically. But I think the biggest impact of Gaza has been pulling young Muslims who especially grew up in the West back to their faith. I grew up basically aspiring to be like an American, to be honest. I grew up on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I grew up and Pimp My Ride and Cribs, and the American lifestyle is so aspirational because it fulfills your most Neanderthal human instincts and desires so quickly. It's so sexy. It's so instantaneous. Get that girl, get that car, live that life, go big. It grips you in. It's got such an allure to a young man's heart. And I believe that story, and I aspire to live in California and be a part of it. And alhamdulillah, I got the chance to experience it. And then Gaza kind of flipped all of that. Gaza revealed the hypocrisy and revealed the lack of humanity below the hood, and revealed that humans and capitalism in its furthest form is inherently evil and has no limits and will do anything for continuous growth, including genocide, and will excuse it. And that is what made it was almost like a conversation with God where you're like, those guys, that's who you think is cool? You want to be like them? Whereas you come from such an amazing tradition that is genuinely careful of human rights, that is genuinely kind and considerate and loving and compassionate and dignified and civilized. Gaza made me realize that the Muslim tradition that I was born into is inherently civilized. And the aspirational West that I'd been seeking to be like them was so uncivilized and barbaric.
Well, you bring up kind of a couple interesting points, specifically like you were influenced by media very heavily in terms of I mean, we all are, but I think in general, like you had this idea of like what it means to be American and the ethos and framework around it. And I think personally, like this is an area of influence that we as Muslims have really should have prioritized, but have not prioritized. It's the influence in the media landscape. So to me, like I would, and now you're really one of the key folks involved in this area. So I would really love to hear your perspective on why do you think that we have not invested as a Muslim community into the media landscape, as well as what do we need to do to enable more influence and the impact that comes from media so that we can start transitioning the ethos and understanding of like general society? Because like I think one of the largest exports of America is media. It's its culture. So I would love to hear your like perspective and thought on that.
We are so short-sighted on media because we don't appreciate that our entire religion is based on media. Like, what is the Quran and the Sunnah other than stories? I'd go as far as to say that.
I've never like heard that before.
What is it? It's just content.
And it's content that's been transformed through certain mediums, whether it be first storytelling by voice, then literature being written down, and then now, I mean, I would say the modern frontier, which is like telling it through video.
Yeah, exactly. The Prophet was, and I get stoned for saying this, but the Prophet was the original influencer. The world's biggest influencer. 2 billion people are now like have hit the like button, the follow button on that account. The Quran is by far the most viral story ever told. I only realized this when, to be honest, I was sitting on the toilet scrolling on TikTok, and I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm spending my life consuming this content, and we believe that the creator of the universe basically handed us a book. Should probably read that book. The person who, the creator, the God who created the planets and the stars and the universe and the people and everything in it is an author. And we haven't really consumed that body of text. And that's the ultimate tragedy for me in my religion. And something that I'm still reconciling is, as you know, we pray in Arabic. The majority of Muslims are born into non-Arabic speaking countries. Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Malaysia. It's an absurd idea to me that I pray in a language I don't understand. I could be reading the Chinese phone book for all I know. That's a ridiculous idea. It kind of makes sense why Western Muslims struggle to adhere to 5 prayers a day if you're mumbling away something that you don't understand. Surely that's not why the Quran was delivered. To deliver this kind of rambling of words that mean nothing to you. I'm detracting from your question though. No, the media question. Right. Yeah, I think there's a few sides to this. I think one, we must give ourselves credit that we are still often not wealthy. Like we are 2nd or 3rd generation migrants. We've maybe reached the millionaire status. We certainly haven't reached the billionaire status. So our communities tend to magnate towards careers that are going to provide guaranteed income.
Do you think that money is like a equivalent factor? Like, I mean, don't you think that you can do a lot less with a lot? You can do a lot more with a lot less.
You can 100% produce a lot of content with not much budget. But our parents, and not my parents, but our parents as a community have a reputation for pushing us into industries that have a more guaranteed salary. Or become a doctor better, become an accountant. Why? Because they believe that there's financial security on the other side of that. They don't know if there's financial security on, hey, brother, start a podcast and maybe it'll work out and maybe it won't work out. I, for one, believe that there's incredible wealth potentially on the other side of media if we do it right. But people don't see that yet. I
think I want to grow on this question a bit more. I think another angle is also, aside from being an individual contributor going into that career path, I mean, when you look at a lot of these media conglomerates, would be Washington Post, New York Times, etc., right? There's a heavy basis on donors, right? A lot of billionaires donating to those particular organizations or even buying them out, right? Washington Post being bought up by Jeff Bezos. And so when it comes to these types of initiatives, I think, are there, because I mean, Muslims are the largest donating base, more than any other base that's out there, right? So we do have capital, but how can we make it more of a priority? Like, what could be the better messaging? Like, hey, it is worthwhile to invest into the Scene TVs and these other independent journalists that are Muslim founded, and you might not see the dollar come back to you immediately, right?
100%. Just on the employment bit, though, I was just thinking about it. The other part of it is when I look at really great producers, really great directors, really great journalists, and you ask them what their parents did for a living, their parents often studied English literature, history. They were arts majors themselves. It goes back to this point, like, because that seeds your employability, right? When you go into these jobs and these opportunities, and you've been in your parents' generation were in film. Your parents' generation were writers. They had books. It changes your entire vernacular. It changes the way you hold yourself. Like, we just haven't had that privilege. And it's happening now. We're the first generation. Alhamdulillah, it's a beautiful thing. On your point on like why we should get into this thing, I think that there is a mistake that we make where we talk about like soft power and hard power. And we think about media as just soft power. Whereas actually, if you just think about it as power, it will better position the story. People don't realize that storytelling is the most powerful thing in the world. Stories are what determine what consumer purchases you make. When you go to a store, what you buy. It determines who you vote for. It determines what you pray to. Literally, religion is just a series of stories. Even when we think about COVID-19 and we were all made to wear masks. Why did we wear masks? Because we were told a story. We were told a story that this would stop the virus from spreading. Of course, people here in Texas and probably like, don't tell me to wear a mask. Can't tell me what to do. I'm an American.
We pretty much did not have COVID.
We actually shot at COVID.
But you know what
I just kept on missing.
These were stories that were told. Like, I think our community needs to appreciate how incredibly powerful storytelling is. At its best, it brings people together. It galvanizes us. It can make us bring about social change. At its worst, it can be incredibly dangerous. It can lead to xenophobia. I was in South Africa in the 2013, 2014, when there was huge economic challenges in the community, right? A lot of jobs being lost. And stories spread that foreign nationals were to blame for that. And what did we witness? We saw foreign nationals, Somalis, Ethiopians, literally be collected in these township communities, put tires around them, and set on fire, burnt alive in a practice called necklacing. But at its core, that's because a story was told. A story was told that they're the bad guys. And I think we are so complacent and naive as Muslims in the UK and the US who just assume that the rights that we enjoy today, the masjids that we have, the halal facilities, the freedoms that we enjoy will just remain. We just take it for granted. Like this is the world we live. No, that stuff is fought for. There was a generation of people that fought bloody hard to maintain those. And if you really want to normalize your existence, normalize the idea that we can have an azan, a call to prayer, normalize the idea that your daughter should be allowed to wear hijab in a public space at a time where in France these things are being banned. Media is the singular most powerful device to do that. It is what educates people's minds. It's what persuades them. It's what says we have more in common than we have apart. I am just like you. Because if we don't invest in it, the other side are. And they're investing it specifically to demonize Arab populations more broadly, Muslim populations more specifically. They've been doing it not just after 9/11, they've been doing it for the last 50 years. Name me a movie in the 80s and 90s where a Muslim wasn't the bad guy. Or if at least he wasn't the bad guy in terms of like saying Allahu Akbar and detonating a bomb, he was the bad guy in terms of being like a sleazy car salesman or doing something nefarious. Like, there is a reason why they look down on us. They look down on us because they've been educated to. If we don't create media organizations, if we don't tell our stories, they'll be told for us. When I joined CNN International in 2016, it was what I thought would be my dream job. I moved to CNN in London. I had Christian Amanpour and all these correspondents that I dreamed of working with. There were 200 international staff in that office. I was the only one that identified as Muslim. In 2016, in London. London's basically a Muslim city, and I was the only one that identified as Muslim. Yet content about the Muslim world maybe made up 20 or 30% of their diary. How on earth are they accurately able to report on the world and really understand what's going on when they have so little representation internally? They used to come and ask me for my opinion on Muslim stories. I was like, I don't know, go find an expert. Like, this is the world that we find ourselves in. So like, we grossly underestimate the power and potential of media. And the reality is, as long as we do that, our stories will be told for us, we will be demonized, and we'll be continually reactive to when the media defame us, as opposed to actually being part of reframing our stories.
I mean, I think you really shine a really important light, which is storytelling. And oftentimes storytelling can go either way, negative or positive, right? And you're in not part of a system, you're building a system that is part of that ecosphere, right? One of the things that really comes to my mind is particularly the genocide that happened with Rohingya in Myanmar, right? And of course, Facebook and all of that happened there with pushing ads, particularly being very anti-Rohingya, which eventually led to his genocide that still perpetuates
today. They have blood
today,
on their hands, for
right?
sure.
And even here in DFW, in the Frisco area, right, I think it has become slightly a meme, but a meme can become a dangerous thing where the anti-narrative towards Indians and H-1Bs and pretty much all those who even look like them will become a problematic place, even if you try to assimilate to be like those who are native to here, I say in air quotes. And so, as a person who wears boots and cowboy hats, I unfortunately probably look like an H-1B person, right? And I say unfortunately is because of the level of persecution and negative communication that are being received on social media. We also see this, for example, at Epic and Masjid, protesters coming in, threatening and making like a lot of xenophobic slurs.
It's become a global story.
Very much so, right? How do you navigate that, right? Because I do find this situation of going back to your point of going back to 60s and 70s, but we can predate that, Thomas, to the 40s and 50s, where the origin of Orientalism was really coming about, right? I don't want to clap back to entertain these negative talks, to humanize myself. I am human from the beginning. I am your equal, and I don't need to entertain that. How do you navigate that in storytelling, or what would that storytelling be?
So there's two things here. One, I think sometimes we approach empathy through the position of like pity and sorrow. Look how sad it is. You attacked my masjid. Why did you throw a pig's head on our graves? And that has proven for the most part not to be very effective. I think what's more effective is where we approach empathy through storytelling through the position of awe and inspiration. Look how cool our culture is. Look how cool our foods are. Look how cool our fashion sense is. Like, I would argue that your kahwa houses, your Yemeni coffee culture that's, wiping the floor with Starbucks here in Texas is probably doing more for anti-Islamophobia than any pity story. So that's one. And we see that in Gaza as well. The stories that we do about inspiration, solutions, and positivity outperform negativity because people have got, frankly, what I call rubble fatigue. They've seen so many rubble stories. And if they're not going to connect with you as a Palestinian because they don't regard you as your fellow human being, there's no amount of stories that I can tell you in the negative space that can do that. But when I show you a story about like the Isaac Newton of Rafah refugee camp, right? This little kid who's like a Steve Jobs who's creating wind turbines to create electricity at a time where there's a siege and they can't get access to fuel and gas. Like, that's an inspirational story. You say, wow, that's untapped potential sitting there. And it's the same with food. It's the same with fashion. So that's the first thing. I would reframe empathy and storytelling and say, we're going to position it through a position of awe. We're cool. Our culture has a lot to offer. We have a lot to contribute here in the US, and we're going to showcase that. The second thing is, sometimes when our communities get into media, we get into it for the sole purpose of fighting back. Of like, oh my God, we are demonized, so we're going to show you that we are good American citizens. There's a different approach. We should simply be creating interesting, entertaining, relevant, and topical media products that just happen to be owned by Muslims. So in the context of here in Dallas, Texas, just launch an absolutely incredible social media first news and entertainment channel. And you guys are the front line of not just the breaking news and current affairs and politics, but also the latest barbecue scene, the food. And you become the go-to resource for just good, authentic journalism. People trust your voice. Then when something happens at the masjid, when you're experiencing Islamophobia, when there's been an attack, that is just a piece of content as part of the bigger plethora of storytelling that you're offering. I think the communities around the world that are approaching it from this perspective and saying, hey, we're not launching a Muslim news channel, we're launching a Muslim, it's just a news channel. It just happens to be that we've got a couple of Muslims working here. It's just a news channel. There, I think you're going to gain the trust and respect of the non-Muslim community. And then when you need to mobilize or activate those channels for something that's pressing or targeted towards your community, you can do it from a position of trust.
Well, let's dive right into that because you're doing just that. You're telling stories beyond just the Muslim diaspora, but for a lot of people that's on Scene TV. And on top of that, you're also making a career out of this, and you have a team that you're able to pay, and that whole structure is there. And obviously it didn't happen overnight. When it came to building your business and telling these stories, did you already come with that mindset? Because your background was in that Muslim North African sphere of Egypt and Syria. But when you started creating Scene TV, when did you decide to increase the scope to include the stories of everybody?
Yeah. So, I mean, even in the American media perspective, there are so many marginalized, unseen communities. The reality is that the majority of media companies are owned and run by old white men. And by virtue of that, the editorial decisions that they make often, neglect and leave out massive parts of this country. And like any business anywhere in the world, a good business is a business that identifies that there is a short supply of something and a large demand for that subject matter. So in the case of Scene TV, we always said we're going in with people's perspectives, the experience of people on the ground. But we specifically said, well, which people are the most ignored? And what we found, for example, is we launched a show called, we started producing a lot of content, and we realized that survivors of gun violence, survivors of rape, survivors of sexual assault in America, many of those communities remain unseen. So many women on college campuses and beyond are assaulted every year, and you just don't hear their stories.
Especially what's trending right now. I'm sure I don't know if you've heard about, I don't even want to frame it, actually. Don't even want to talk about it. I'm sorry I brought it up. But long story short, there's this like situation right now where a woman is now being sharing stories of their significant partners who essentially put sleeping medicine to them and sexually assaulted their partner, recorded, filmed, and posted that. And it's a whole network of these things happening. And because one woman was brave enough to share her story is now actually causing a domino effect of many women
100%.
coming out and talking about these things and shining a light on those dialogues. Now,
these stories were often ignored by traditional media. We did these stories, we found it resonated with millions of Americans, and we were able to spin that off as its own show called Scene Survivors. Same thing with women's health. Again, most of these media organizations are run by old white men. You don't see many stories on menstrual hygiene. You don't see many stories on menopause. We were able to produce a show called Scene Health, which just mainly looks at young women's stories. Mental health is another category. Again, the old white men that run these media companies completely ignore the mental health experience of young Americans, and it impacts so many of them. We're able to launch a show called Scene Minds, which looks at mental health. So I think time and time again, we were able to find these underserved audiences. That's where it's at. Underserved audiences where there's a huge demand to hear those stories and they just don't have enough content.
So when it came to Scene TV and trying to find funding, Snap was one of your first investors. What was kind of going through your head in terms of finding investors? What made you lean towards Snap? How did you navigate that decision? Because obviously when it comes to any media platform, there are investors, there's people who are putting money because they believe in you, but there is this question from an audience perspective. It's like, oh, they're being influenced from XYZ factors. How did you kind of navigate that decision making, and what lessons would you have hindsight if you could do things differently, if you were to do things differently?
Yeah, they say you can tell who controls you by what you're not allowed to talk about. And I think said another way, you can tell who controls a media company by who they take their money from. We were very conscious to make sure we only took investments from value-aligned partners. But that's one thing to say it. Materially, in terms of like our term sheets and our contracts, we were very clear to make it explicit that basically no investor would have any editorial rights. We never, ever want to be in a position where somebody says, hey, could you not say that? Or could you say this differently? What does a media company sell? Trust. That's it.
Well, nowadays, I don't know.
But in theory, a journalism publication sells trust.
Right.
And that's the only commodity that you have, is that I'm selling you legitimate, like you can trust that this is accurate. And it's like a relationship. If you lose trust, it's really hard to get it back. So we were very, very precious about that. I'd say the other thing is like, don't take investments unless you absolutely have to. In the American landscape, there's something like aspirational about just raising money for the sake of raising money.
You have opinions, right? No,
I raised $1 million. Well, I raised $5 million. Well, I raised $10 million. It's like, okay, so you own less and less of your business. You have less control, and ultimately you are being pressured to make money. I suppose my main advice to anybody starting a media company is ideally don't raise any money. And if you do raise an absolutely minimal amount. There's no success in the vanity metrics of raising finance.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think that it's like significantly easier today, not just to create a business, but also to create anything in the media landscape. Like you have all throughout today talked very extensively about why storytelling is important, getting to the nooks and crannies and like really focusing on your fundamentals. How has like Scene TV been positioned when you're competing with traditional media landscapes? Like you're clearly picking areas that are underserved and neglected. But how has that affected like your capital allocation strategy?
Yeah.
And like how you're actually deploying money in a way that actually like gives you enough value back to keep sustaining?
Absolutely no CapEx budget. So you in 2026 do not need to spend on a single microphone, a single tripod, a single light, or a camera to launch a media company. We've published 7,000 videos. We've generated over 1 billion views. We've got over 7 million subscribers, and we don't own a single camera. Not one. We don't rent any studio space. You probably spent more on this podcast in terms of the capital expenditure than we've spent ever producing content. We were very conscious that brands like BuzzFeed News and Vice News and Attention and so many other American media brands shut down, especially over the last 2 to 3 years, when they are producing content at television operating costs, but they are searching for social media revenue. And there is a massive disconnect there. When you're spending $5,000 to $10,000 per minute to produce video content, but that content is only monetizing on Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat for say $1,000, there's going to be a shortfall. And yes, the Jeff Bezoses of the world or the Elon Musks can afford to own media companies where they bankroll it, or Rupert Murdoch, because they recognize the immense power of owning a media company, and they will recoup those costs in other parts of their business. But if you don't have that equation, if you're just trying to do authentic, independent journalism, you got to make sure you keep your overheads incredibly lean. The good news is, today, in 2026, amidst generative AI and all this stuff, young people want raw, real, authentic content. They want stories that look like a FaceTime call. They want things that look real. So adding all that polish, adding all those fancy cameras, adding all that lights is often a massive disservice. And I think the ultimate irony and frustration I see in the Ummah is we spend so much on that stuff. We're like, okay, bye, let's make a documentary. And they drop $50,000 into something that nobody's going to watch. Nobody's going to watch. It's so terrible. And the worst culprits of this are the Muslim NGOs. The Muslim NGOs every Ramadan will boost for $100,000. They'll push on Meta and Google for you to see their ad, and their ad sucks. Nobody's going to watch that ad unless you spend enough money to shove it in front of people's faces.
It's also often just trauma dumping
content. Exactly. It's this white saviorism. It's this Sudanese kid with a flower in their mouth saying, oh, help Abdul. He's like, the world has moved so far past that narrative. The way that we should be doing it is we should have no ad spend. We should be razor focused on organic reach at the lowest possible cost. And only when and if we see organic reach and views, then you should boost that piece of content, something that's already got legs. Otherwise, you're just flogging a dead horse. So for us, in answer to your question, we make small investments and basically get data. And once we have that data, we go further. So in the context of Palestine, we've got these 50 creators on the ground in Gaza. We'll produce 1-minute videos with you or 30-second videos. If those are landing, we'll continue. We'll do 3 minutes. If those are landing, we'll do 10 minutes. And over the period of 3 or 6 months, now I've worked with you and I've seen data has informed which pieces are performing well, which ones are not. And we may have done 50 stories together. And once I've done 50 stories with you, I'm in a position to produce a documentary. So it's like making investments in media and content, and we should apply the same thing in our communities. Instead of saying, hey, let's give $20,000 to Muhammad because he's going to launch a media company, say, actually, we're going to give $1,000 to 20 Muhammads and Fatimas and see which one of them actually can do a lot with $1,000. Great, this one got 100 million views. Let's put rocket fuel behind her.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely, democratizes the pool versus just giving one, right? And I think we see this with a lot of content creator strategies is when you have one person, I mean, they call them clipping accounts, right? But essentially it functions the same way. You have multiple accounts saying similar different things in different ways because each of those clippers see what is being conveyed differently and they're artistically showing it in the manner that they think is going to be most received, right? And then the original content creator sees, oh, this is what I need. This is the content clipper I need because he gets gets the audience, right? But I do
These clip farms are fascinating.
It is.
We should get somebody onto this one.
Inshallah, if you know anybody, they'll be. If you're watching, let us know. One of the things that I think want to transition to a little bit here is your ability to stay honest. And I think this is kind of important. And this is something I've witnessed, at least through being a follower on your Instagram, particularly being in Dubai or the UAE during Doha, during the strikes when they were happening, right? I think a lot of times when people find themselves in a situation where their life is in danger or the thought of it is in danger, but beyond that, your family's life is in danger, we sometimes let go of our values and like what we can like believe and things like that, right? You seem to still be principled in terms of understanding the geopolitical situation and what was happening in the world. How did you navigate that? Like, what was going through your mind that moment?
It was really difficult working in the Middle East during this Iran war. This is something that I've not spoken about publicly, but I ended up in a police station. I was with my family. We were at a hotel. We were seeing, missiles that were being intercepted literally right above our hotel. I was filming this footage. I was putting it online. And within like 2 or 3 days, we got phone calls from the police saying, hey, we need you to come into the station. And I went in and they were not disrespectful. They were super nice about it. They basically said 2 things. They were like, one, you are revealing the location of our kind of Patriot missiles and anti-air infrastructure. And I was like, all right, fair enough. And 2, they're like, yo, we're telling citizens to stay away from the missiles and you're running up to the rooftop and doing the complete opposite. As a journalist, always running towards the danger. So I was like, all right, fair enough. And in this instance, they actually deleted, if you go onto my social media, they deleted all my footage of the missile attacks. And this is the first time that's ever happened in my career. And a lot of these countries are doing it through what they say is security and safety measures. But the reality is there's also a massive perception play here, because the Middle East doesn't just run on oil, it also runs on confidence. And they've spent, the last 50 years building these incredible cities out of the desert, populating them with millions of people and expats from around the region and around the world. And now they've got these like economies that need to be run by millions of people. And these people are not citizens. They have absolutely no loyalty to these lands. And while they claim online, oh my God, I'm staying forever, like if water runs out or electricity runs out or it gets significantly dangerous, they're the first to dip. They're going to leave. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of these countries have cracked down really hard on content creators and trying to clean up the online image. However, I think it's going to backfire really badly. I think for John or Judy from New York or London, they will be more concerned about their social media accounts getting censored than they will about the missiles in the sky. Like, I think that equally has a lot of reputational risk. So it was a weird time for me as a journalist reporting in the Middle East during the Iran war and all these missiles that were being intercepted, because I was trying to do my job, but at the same time, you're doing it within the framework of a part of the world where you realize that your ability to do your job can be massively curtailed.
Yeah, and I think there's this growing rise in censorship that's happening not only in the Gulf states, but even here in the United States.
Yeah.
One of my guru for Silat, at least, brother Yaqub, who is currently being unjustly held in ICE detention centers, was probably the most active documenter of all the protests that were happening, at least here in DFW. And so what I lead with this is what Scene TV and what you're growing, right? Like a main focus is content creation, news capturing, right? How are you planning for that, right? Could you share a bit like what you see the future of Scene TV in this new arena that exists? Because prior to October 7th and what we see now is that we did held on to the belief that media and journalism won't get censored, that we'll be able to capture these stories and share these stories that need to be told. But as you've experienced yourself, there is going to be this new battlefield of journalism where you might not be able to tell the story that you do want to get told.
So we've got about $1 million left. And my co-founder and I could call it a day and, get a nice house and be like, oh, it's been a good run.
That's an intimate co-founder.
Yeah. Co-founder and wife.
Okay, there you go. For the audience.
Co-founder and wife.
I was like, we're co-founders, but we're not talking about homes yet.
Maybe one day.
Inshallah. The mother-in-law suite.
We can do a family compound. Right?
Everyone's obsessed with family compounds.
What's that? The Naveed-in-law suite.
I love it. I'm coming.
Come too.
I'm coming.
We'll have a bunch of yerbies.
Yeah.
We've got $1 million left. We could, call it a day and, semi-retire, inshallah, somewhere. Or we could chase a really big dream. And we have a really big dream, which almost sounds audacious or impractical to people that hear it, but I believe we can pull it off. We're trying to build a 24-hour live news channel entirely with user-generated content and citizens around the world. Right now, we're at a time in history where you cannot even trust your eyes when it comes to the media that you consume on your social media feeds. And that trajectory is only going to get worse. This idea of manipulated media. I mean, my team are able to put together videos that look like I am talking and it's not me. And my own parents, the people that birthed and raised me, cannot even tell that this is not a real video. These videos are fooling my own parents. So this is the scary future that we're moving into, where even us as journalists are struggling to separate fact from fiction and what's real from versus what's manipulated. And the stuff is going to get so much better. And when I say better, I mean worse. In that world, we believe that there is a vital role for live news. Take me to Gaza and show me exactly what's happening on the ground. Take me to Sudan. Take me to Iran. And previously, that capacity required billions of dollars and massive infrastructure. And now, a decentralized network of thousands of people on mobile phones, supported by journalists, fact-checked editorially, we can do this. There's no reason why we can't create a media platform that can compete with Fox News, CNN, Al Jazeera, all of these organizations. Here's the really interesting part. One, as we described earlier, clip farms. You have to have a massive clip farm off the back of it so that you're able to throw this thing into 1 million different derivatives. People forget that live broadcasting isn't just about breaking news. It's also the fastest way to produce content. Imagine if right now, this podcast, instead of it being recorded and it's going to go off into an edit suite and you probably will be watching it on your feeds at best a week after it's recorded, more likely 3 or 4 weeks. Imagine if this was live streamed right now, this very conversation that we just had. And imagine if you had a clip farm in the Philippines, in India, that are repurposing this. By the end of this meeting, by the end of this conversation, we would have already generated 5 or 10 million views. If you had enough video editors that are cutting it up in enough different directions.
You should have told us this in the beginning.
Literally, but you know what I mean, right? Like, when you start to think about this workflow, live makes sense. It's the fastest way. And when we think about virality of content online, we think about this viral video formula, and there's 3 aspects to it. Is it visual? Is it really visually interesting? This, I'd argue, is not. Is it debatable? Is there like polarizing topics? Is the second thing. And the third is it relevant or trending? Is it something that people are topically talking about right now? And we believe that that third indicator, topical, is the most important. It maybe makes up 80% of the decision about whether it's going to go viral. If everybody's talking about the Iran war right now, and you get something in about it, and it's trending and topical, you're already halfway there. You're leveraging the algorithms, you're leveraging the conversation. What achieves that better than live content? So what you're going to see on CNTV is you're going to see 24-hour live program, which include podcasts, which include documentaries, which includes short form, which includes being able to cross to experts around the world. And I'm really, really excited by this. Financially is the difficult part. I worry that I dedicate way too much of my time, skills, energy, and so do my team on stuff that doesn't serve us. Making ads for somebody, creating content for somebody else. And even worse is when I see brothers and sisters that unfortunately are dedicating their entire lives to industries that don't serve us. Spend their whole life, 40 years working in a bank. End of the day, what do they get? A sausage and thanks so much for coming. Like, that's the tragedy. I only want to focus on doing amazing journalism. So I expect that the organization will get a little bit smaller for a little while. We'll focus in on true, original, independent journalism. And I want to have a relationship with the audience. Say, hey, if you support this work, pay a subscription. But don't pay a subscription so that you have exclusive access to it. That's the opposite. We don't want a paywall. Information wants to be free. Pay a patronage so you want to see more of this journalism exist in the world. I think that's why people support Zateo and Mehdi Hassan. They don't support Zateo because they want to attend his town hall and have exclusive access to Mehdi. They pay it because they're like, yeah, you're taking on the man, you're debating, you're fighting a good fight, you're anti-Islamophobic, and it's the same thing. So that's what we're trying to build.
So as an audience member, how can they support you? I mean, we're all consumers of media. What's the best way to, keep our ears and eyes prone to being part of this mission, even as a consumer?
I think there's three kind of tiers of support that would be very valuable. The minimum level would be to be an engaged audience. And that is paying a subscription model, buying merch, these kinds of things. That's kind of the minimum barrier of entry, sharing the work.
Do you see a merch show off?
That's it. Okay. I got to bring you one. You made that? We made these. These are ours. Yeah. Okay. 100% of the funds go to more storytellers in Gaza, paying salaries, etc. So the first tier is being an engaged audience, supporting financially, sharing the content, etc. The second tier is becoming a creator, saying, hey, I'm interested in brisket in Texas. I'm going to help develop out food verticals, and I'm going to send in interesting food content. That's the second, is to be a contributor. And that's an ideal kind of flywheel that you want to be in, where your audience become your creators, right? That's the golden scenario that you want to have. And then that third tier is to come and work with us. Like, it's incredibly hard to hire people that are willing to dedicate the next 3 to 5 years of their life and work incredibly hard on a bigger vision. It's really hard to find people like that. Most people don't realize in my organization, I think most of your audience are Muslim. We have 28 staff. Now, my co-founder and I are the only Muslims. Yeah, we don't have a Muslim organization. And I want to continue to keep it diverse, but I do want more value-aligned people. Because what frustrates me is when it's, 9 p.m. on a Friday night and we are razor focused on a story coming out of Lebanon, for example, where they've just targeted these ambulances, right? Systematically targeted a series of ambulances like they did in Gaza. When you have value line people, there's no resistance to being on call at 9 p.m. on a Friday night because there's nothing else you'd rather be doing. This is the most important thing in the world right now. Yeah, so that's the third tier, is finding people that want to work with us, that are just like, they live and eat and sleep this stuff. And that's how myself and my co-founder feel. Like, if we weren't earning a salary, if we weren't getting paid to do this, I would be doing exactly the same thing. And alhamdulillah, that's the greatest blessing you can possibly have. And it's hard to find, but if you can find your purpose, your calling, if you can find the thing that you would be willing to do for free, but somebody is paying you to do, that's exactly where you should be.
That's incredible. And I mean, Yusuf, I don't want to keep you any longer here, but I really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us and share your entire journey, at least moments of it. And I feel like I'm looking forward to a book.
The only thing I'd add,
yeah.
They say every journalist has a good book in them, and that's exactly where it should stay.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd add, and this is a big one, is we are starting a new project specifically for Muslim Americans. We're launching an accelerator in basically over the next 30 days for Muslim American creators who have a very small audience. I'm talking about that person who's listening and they've got 5,000 or 10,000 followers, but you just know they should be on 1 million. You just know this voice deserves to be heard. We want to identify 20 Muslim American creators. They don't have to be young either. They could be 50 or 60 years old. It's fine. And we're going to supercharge them. We're going to train them up. We're going to pay them salaries. We're going to boost their content so it reaches larger audiences. And we're going to guide them through this process. And at the end of that 12 months, my hope is that their content is doing so well that they can leave their 9 to 5 and that they're going to find revenue from social publishing. I believe, we've been speaking a lot about investing in media. I don't believe that we should be building singular media channels. I don't believe if we've got $10 million, we should be trying to build a new Al Jazeera or whatever it might be. The reason for that is because those channels can easily be shadow banned and shut down, especially if we're building it on the rails of other people's infrastructure on their social media platforms.
Well, YouTube just banned the Iranian Lego account.
Tragic.
Absolutely. That was my pre-workout song.
That guy's sitting in some mountain 600 feet under him.
Editing away.
Yeah. So they can easily do that. What we need is decentralized storytelling. If you're going to spend $1 million here in the US, don't spend it on one media company. Spread it out across 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 content creators. The position we as a Ummah need to be in North America specifically, and the KPIs that we need to be setting, we should be saying by 2030, we're going to take 100,000 Muslims and we're going to get them to 1 million followers each. What an exciting future. In food, in fashion, in lifestyle, in health, in tourism. That's power. That's real influence. And across the political spectrum, far left, far right. Think of it like Venn diagrams where they're in between. So if you're listening and you're interested in becoming a creator and you want to work on the Accelerator, you can get in touch with me on my Instagram or just inbox me, Yusuf@scene.tv.
And that's a wrap. Yusuf Omar coming all the way from Australia, whether it be hitchhiking from...
Mainly for the brisket.
Mainly for the brisket. Mainly for the brisket. Which Yerbis, they'll be inshallah tomorrow. But Yusuf, thank you so much for joining the podcast, and may Allah increase you in your endeavors and may you achieve them and beyond what you can expect. So we need it. The Ummah needs it, and we're cheering you on.